And one of the first questions I simply ask people is, how much of your investable net worth, not your house and, but your investable net worth, what percent of your investable net worth is outside your home country? And people kind of scratch their head and they think, well, I've got some Toyota stock and some Nestle and some BMW. I'm like, but hang on. Like, yeah, you're diversified internationally, but that's all on the US, New York Stock Exchange or an ETF or whatever it is. So it's not really a foreign asset, right? It's a foreign company, but it's still a domestic asset. What percent of your investable net worth is truly internationally diversified? And the answer is usually next to none. We ought to have somewhere between 5 and 20% of our net worth outside our home country. Never bet against the United States. Let me just be very clear.
Welcome to the Path to Passive podcast, where we talk about building wealth and empowering lifestyle through commercial real estate investing for tech professionals. I always wish that other tech professionals reaching financial freedom had documented their journey along the way, so I'm doing it for the rest of us. Join us as we explore stories, many failures, and lessons learned along the way. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Hey, my guest today, Mike Cobb, asks investors a question that almost always stops them in their tracks. What percentage of your investable net worth is actually outside your home country? Not as a rule, just as a way to reveal blind spots most people haven't thought through. On this episode of Path to Passive, I sit down with Mike Cobb, CEO of ECI Development, who spent more than 25 years operating across Latin America as a developer, lender, and long-term investor. This isn't a hype conversation. It's just a thinking conversation, and he talks about investments that are available, but we also talk about how to evaluate international real estate as diversification, why most people confuse a lifestyle purchase with an investment, or what he likes to call a heart decision, lifestyle, versus investment, which is more a head decision, right? And how certain mistakes can get really expensive. The mindset shift that investors have to make when moving from the US to overseas markets or thinking about overseas markets, and how it goes from seller beware to buyer beware, and how remote work and global mobility has really changed this, right? For all of us as investors, from demand, opportunity, and capital flow. Where to go next? One point, Mike frames this as a way that the developing world is a time machine, explains how understanding timelines, matching them to the right geography, is where long-term opportunity actually shows up. So if you're a tech professional, thinking about global optionality, thinking about how to invest on a bigger scale as well, or just thinking about what that could look like and diversifying beyond the US, just want a clear framework for evaluating international opportunities. This one is a really interesting to listen to, and I had a great time talking to Mike as well. Mike is also giving away his free book, or I should say his book, for free. You should email Mike at podcast@ecidevelopment.com with the subject Mike's book, and they'll send you the Amazon voucher. You'll find Mike's links and resources in the show notes as well. And of course, if you're getting value from this show, Path to Passive, I would really appreciate it if you could please subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to. Helps the show grow and allows us to bring more thoughtful guests just like this. All right, let's get into it. Enjoy. Mr. Mike Cobb, dude, I am super stoked to have you here. I think what you're doing and what you're bringing to our listeners, what you've been bringing to the world, if I could be so bold to say, is really quite cool. The stuff that you work on is the things that people dream and wish they could do. And just, it's so cool to have you here to talk about and share experience from someone who's really doing it. And I've checked out, your material, the site, etc. And you're not just developing in other beautiful countries, but you're doing it with big name brands like Marriott as well, which I know we're going to get into. But like I said, I'm excited to have you here. I'd like you to talk about how you explain who you are to our audience, and then we'll get in.
Sure. Stephen, nice to be with you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I think that maybe the foundational level of my life story, and probably many of the folks in tech. I came out of tech, by the way. I don't know if you knew that or not. Yeah. So I was with a IBM clone manufacturer in the Washington, D.C. area for about 13 years. And we served a lot of the government contractors. We were an OEM, so we built a clone to their specifications. It was a phenomenal ride from 1986 to 1998. But obviously that industry tightened up and you had the few big players, the Dell, the Compaqs, and we got weeded out of it. But thank goodness I'd already, starting in 1993, had started to dabble in things overseas. But this sense of adventure, right? I think this is a big deal. Entrepreneurs generally have it, right? Or people who are on the cutting edge, right? Maybe the leading edge of things. It's a sense of curiosity and adventure that drives people forward. And I really fell into an opportunity in Belize back in 93, 94, which was to provide financing to North Americans who were buying a property in Belize, because no bank in Austin, Texas, where you are, or Shepherdstown, West Virginia, where I live, would loan money on a condo or a property in Belize, and no bank in Belize would lend foreigners money. And so there was this big hole in the marketplace, and we saw it. My business partner and we figured out a way to solve it with a little mortgage company. And we did that. We set up a little mortgage company. That was our very first business. And it was nice because I was still in the computer business. I could fly down to Belize every other month and look for opportunities and properties that we could finance. And that's really how we got our start. But it was seeing a need and then serving that need, finding a solution for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I saw it correctly, you were like VP of sales, and you were definitely, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So spotting opportunities and seeing where the need is a key component of looking at what do people need out there? And so leveraging that quite well.
It is. Can I offer just a crazy concept real quick?
Yeah.
Sometimes people ask me what I do, and it depends on how glib I want to be on the answer. You just asked me, so I was not be so glib. But sometimes I just simply say, I tame chaos for a living, right? That's what I do. I tame chaos for a living. But a better answer that goes all the way back to the computer industry, I see myself as a future teller, or not a fortune teller, but a seer of the future. And one of the things that I was so successful with our company in the tech field was looking at the future of chipsets, right? The new video chipset, or the new hard drive technology that was coming out, or the new RAM technology, whatever it was, new motherboard technology, new chips. I started with 8088s and XTs and, right? I mean, anyway, but looking at this evolution of technology coming down the pike and being able to predict the future, to say, we did a lot of work with the federal government. We didn't. Our clients did a lot of work with the federal government, right? And so there would be these bidding opportunities for whatever, 800 computers, 1,000 computers, 60, whatever it was, but hundreds to thousands of computers. And what we almost always knew was that there was going to be a delay from the time we bid the computer to when we had to deliver it. And then some contracts delivered over long periods of time. And so I was a political science major in college. I knew nothing about computers or technology. I went to the Computer Learning Center, picked up an associate's degree in electrical engineering so I could read things like EE Times, right? So I could understand this technology that was coming down the pike, and then networking a ton to see what was happening in the industry. And we were able to really bid product at prices that were today below cost. But again, there's some risk there. But we knew that if in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and depending on how long the process was and who was bidding and the agencies, there were a lot of factors, like we could dial out there and say, you know what? Like, we know that the price will be about here. So we would actually bid stuff below cost, well below cost, depending on what it was. And so this idea of a time machine became formulated in my head. And when we go overseas, and there was a reason I was going with this in bringing it to real estate and investment in real estate, like, the time machine exists. The developing world is not like a time machine. The developing world is a time machine. It is a time machine. And this concept, the whole Marty McFly, can you go back in time? And right, you can. And different countries are different years back on this development scale, right? And so if we as investors understand the concept of a time machine in the developing world, we can align our investment goals, and we can align our return on investment and timelines, and we can figure that stuff out pretty well and really do incredibly well with it. And I think that time machine concept is a beautiful construct. It's a beautiful overlay to investing overseas. So we may come back to that with some other topics, but it evolved out of the computer business. That's where the concept came from, the tech business.
I want to ask you more later on about how, what you can share about developing that skill set. Because I'm sure I'm sure there's things you can be like, I was always good at this thing or whatever, but leaning into, we've talked about in this podcast a lot of leaning into what you like and what you're good at, unique ability for you. But I think we've been dancing around exactly what the topic is for today. And so I
I'm
think,
sorry.
no, it's totally good. It's totally good because there's some useful through line that you're setting up here. There's some useful through line you're setting up here about quote unquote time machine. And that resonates a lot for me too, because I like to say where I'm from, Hawaii, it's 5 years, 10 years behind the United States. And so
Yeah.
to
Okay.
your point, about this too, it's other markets in the US, right? Maybe in the Southeast, I'm thinking Alabama and Tennessee, some of these places,
Yep.
they're also behind some, and so they
Great
provide great
example.
markets.
Yes.
So talk
Yep.
about what specifically you and your company does,
Okay.
ECI Development, and what you offer to what you do and how you offer it to investors as well who's listening.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for bringing us back to home here. I started in the finance side of things, financing people buying properties overseas. And what I saw, because I was the collateral guy, my business partner's a lawyer. He did the money, the deals, the contracts, the title work, all that kind of stuff. I did the boots on the ground. So when we were financing properties, I was the guy that walked into the house, the condo, the property, and looked at it. And what was amazing to me was you'd have these incredibly well-built product, concrete, steel, rebar, hurricanes, Belize, hurricane rated, all that kind of stuff. But you'd walk in the bathroom and the light would be back here and your face would be in a shadow, right? Or the countertops were too high or too low and your knees would bang. You tried to sit at the bar, door handles at every different height. There was no standardization. I remember walking into one condo one time, and in the living room, there was one outlet on one wall. They had plugged outlet strips with extension cords into outlet strips to run power around the living room. And so I'm looking at this collateral and I'm thinking, the building is well built, like it's sticking around, right? But it didn't meet a North American standard of what our expectations are. And I said, we could fix all of these things for free. Like our $10 an outlet or something, but I throw $100 more into the product. And like, it's free, basically. We could make a North American standard product for the same price. And that was the genesis of our development business, which we started in 1996. And so we started in Belize. We ended up with a huge piece of property in Nicaragua. We built a beautiful resort community there. We have a giant piece of property in Costa Rica. We have properties in Panama. We've done development work with partners in Honduras. So we're all over Latin America. We have a huge teak and timber business in Panama and Nicaragua as well. And the mortgage company back in 2003 actually became a bank. So our bank is now 23 years old, and we're still really a mortgage bank. We still provide mortgages to North Americans. So we're really in three very distinct businesses: the financing banking side, the timber and reforestation side, and then the development side, including, you mentioned it earlier, the Marriott. We're building a Marriott resort in San Pedro and Ambergris Caye right now, but we've got beautiful communities for really all segments of investors, depending on what they're looking for. And a lot of what we do is also lifestyle, right? It's helping people find the right lifestyle. And just, we can come back to this because I do think this is really important too, is lifestyle is a heart decision, investment's a head decision. And I think that probably deserves some little further exploration at some point today too, if you're game.
I think that's actually a really great place to start. But I just want to recap there in Latin America, because there's a bunch of different countries you talked about, the three different businesses. It's ECI Development. You started with the finance. It was a mortgage company that's now a bank.
Yep.
Super cool. Also teak and wood, which I didn't know that was down there. Whenever I think of teak, I think of Thailand and Vietnam and places
India.
like that.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And then the development one, like you're talking about here too, which has a lifestyle component too. So a three-pronged business. And I'm sure there's obviously being in business and being in service of wherever you are, is those are working together well. But like I said, I think it's important to talk, maybe start off with a little more. That's what you do. But then it's also, who is it for? And the who is it for, to make it applicable to the listener right now too, is how do people, maybe client conversations you've had, investor conversations, think about this? Because before we hit record in this and started, I said these are, many of our listeners are the tech professionals who are credited, that are working Amazon and Netflix, Google, whatever. And they probably are about, career. And what are, just to give the profile. So what are some of these conversations you have with clients that to help get enough information, I say, or decide on this heart decision route? What are some questions they should be thinking to themselves?
Absolutely. One of the things I like to do is I ask a lot of questions generally at conferences and meetings or where I'm meeting folks. And one of the first questions I simply ask people is, How much of your investable net worth, not your house, but your investable net worth, what percent of your investable net worth is outside your home country? And people scratch their head and they think, I've got some Toyota stock and some Nestle and some BMW. I'm like, but hang on. Yeah, you're diversified internationally, but that's all on the US New York Stock Exchange or an ETF or whatever it is. So it's not really a foreign asset, right? It's a foreign company, but it's still a domestic asset. What percent of your investable net worth is truly internationally diversified? And the answer is usually next to none. Sometimes people have a vacation property somewhere in Canada, a cabin in Canada or a condo in Cancun or something, but it's a very small amount. And look, I'm not an investment advisor. I don't give investment advice. But over the years, my personal opinion is that we ought to have somewhere between 5 and 20% of our net worth outside our home country. Right? Look, we're talking about tech professionals. Assuming we have big W-2, right? We're earning a lot of money in our W-2, right? So that money, that income is all domestic, right? It's here. Maybe we have rental properties, or maybe we're doing fix and flip, or whatever it is. Maybe we're part of multifamily syndication, right? We've got lots of things that we can be doing with our money, but it's all in the U.S., and it's okay. I would never bet against the United States. Let me just be very clear. Like having 10%, 15%, whatever that is outside the home country, that's just a hedge. That's not a bet against. It's just saying, hey, having all my eggs in one basket, even the best basket in the world, right? Which US, I think, is an investment basket, is probably the best basket in the whole world, right? But it's still one basket. And so this diversification element's the first question. And it usually gets people thinking because they think IBM, or they think BMW and Nestle and Toyota, but that's not it. That's still domestic. So I usually start there. And then I kind of move to this next element, which is, okay, is this a lifestyle decision? Heart, do I like it? Do I like my neighbors? Is there a cool little restaurant and bar down the street? Whatever it is, right? Do I like it, right? Versus investment, which is a head decision. And I always give this example when I do that. I say, look, if you owned a pizza parlor and you hated anchovy pizza, would you still sell anchovy pizza? Sure. Of course, it's not what I like. It's what the guy walking in the door likes. And so we have to, especially when it comes to real estate, right? We really have to separate this idea of what I like from what the marketplace likes, from what the consumer likes. And can I go off on a quick tangent? Because it's very, very relevant. Okay. For the first time in human history, this is a huge statement. First time in human history, work and the location of work have been decoupled for millions of people, right? If you go all the way back to caveman times, you had to kill the animal to eat it, you had to pick the berries, right? And then they got really smart. They said, you know what? We can put fences around the animals. We can put the plants in rows. The agricultural revolution, there's the word revolution, right? The agricultural revolution, but you still had to be there. And then in the 1700s, we had the industrial revolution, right? But people still had to show up at the factories to work the machines, right? Then in the 60s and 70s, the Alvin Toffler and John Nesbitt wrote Megatrends and Future Shock. These great books coming out in the late 60s, early 70s about this post-industrial revolution, right? But like people still sat in their cars in traffic for an hour or two each way to do this, right? So we had these management structures that were carried forward from the industrial age that were there. But COVID, the government's response to COVID, stay at home, broke that. And it made companies and managers and employees figure out how to work in a new environment, the true post-industrial environment. And the reason this is important for a real estate investor is I might like a quiet, I'm 61 years old. I'm a boomer, right? I'm the last of the boomers, right? But I'm 61 years old. I might like a condo in a kind of a quiet area where I can just look out at the sunset or the surf or whatever it is. I don't know, not really, but I'm just saying, like my generation, that kind of hits the mark, right? But the digital nomads, they don't want that. They want the party scene. They want to be where the action is, right? And if I'm making a lifestyle purchase, I'm not going to call it an investment. If I'm making a lifestyle purchase, I might buy the 5th floor condo at the Marriott, whatever, or whatever quiet community, right? If I'm going to make an investment, I'm going to invest a cash flow investment. Let me be more specific. If I'm looking for cash flow investment, I'm going to invest where the young people who are digital nomads, who are going to come rent for 3 months or 6 months, right? Because they don't have the money. These 20 something, 30 something year olds, they don't have the money to buy something. The other thing that's really interesting, Stephen, they don't have the interest to buy something either.
True.
They want to go here for 3 months or 6 months, go there for 3 months, go there for right? They're going to bop around and see the world 3 to 6 months at a time and do this from wherever they are. We as investors need to be really smart about that and go, what are they looking for? What's the right product for them?
Correct.
It's anchovy pizza to me,
Exactly.
baby. I don't want to eat it, but you know what? They do, and I'm going to fix it for them. So this dichotomy, this is hard for a lot of people, right? Because this heart decision, lifestyle purchase versus an investment. So I really counsel people hard on this at conferences, especially when I'm making presentations about you've got to separate the two. You got to make a break. It's not about what you like. It's about what they like, right? And when we can shift our mindset to that, we can all of a sudden become very thoughtful and proactive in our decision making about what investment is going to be the best investment. Right. So anyway.
So it's interesting because we have a couple of forks in the road here. I'm counting at least 2 forks, which is a very fun mental model and path here because I totally buy if I don't like anchovy pizzas, I need to sell them because listen, I know a bunch of vegetarians. My girlfriend's a vegetarian. I love vegetables, but I also like my grilled chicken. Okay. And so if there are vegan restaurants that are doing well, God bless them. But my point is the heart is what what you and team and company are building. Is the idea for the owner to have property in somewhere else or investment property in somewhere else? Maybe I'm missing the point there.
No, it's great. Look, I'm happy when somebody wants to own our product, right? I get that. That's why we're in business, whatever. But we don't make the perfect product for everybody. Some people like Pizza Hut, some people like Domino's, some people like Papa John's, right? Staying on pizza for a minute. Anyway, but the point is that there are different pizza restaurants because even though it's all pizza, it's different, right? Yep. And we tend to, because what we do is fairly large scale, we are able to serve both, I'm going to say a lifestyle owner who's looking for maybe something that's more baby boomer oriented, a little bit more sedate, right? A golf. In fact, our Grand Pacifica community is a beach and golf resort, right?
Cool.
And so it's really geared more towards a retiree than it is, say, a young person who wants active lifestyle, right? Yep. Ambergris Caye, Belize, where we're building our Marriott, on the other hand, it's not a place that most people would choose for a lifestyle because it's basically Belize's Cancun. And so if you ask a retiree, do you want to go live in Cancun? They're like, hell no. So again, depending on what somebody answers the question, because again, to me, it's always about asking questions to find out what somebody needs and wants and then serving that need. I'm not a big fan of selling. I'm a huge fan of serving. And the only way we know what we can serve is by asking somebody. And fortunately, our company has enough differentiation in our product mix that we can serve the investor who says, but by the way, I mean, like most people don't want to live in Cancun, but most people get the joke that like, hey, if I'm going to own say Cancun, but in this case, Belize's Cancun, right? Ambergris Caye, it's the party center. It's the hopping place. That's where people go. That's where people come on vacation for a week. And that's how you make money in a cash flow investment, right? But if you're looking for a home, which is a very different thing, right? You don't need to make money. You don't want to make money. You want to have a wonderful place with great neighbors and a great lifestyle. So I think our ability as a development company to serve across the spectrum is good because we have that differentiation of product. And I'll give one more differentiation that blows people's mind, and that's the teak timber. I think a lot of times people look at, if you're W-2, you get paid every 2 weeks or whatever, every month or whatever it is, right? But you're getting paid, say, every 2 weeks. If you're a landlord, you get paid once a month, right? If you're a stockholder, let's assume the dividends are paid once a year, you get a dividend once a year. So we've quickly identified 3 different cash flows: 2 weeks, 1 month, 1 year. There's another cash flow cycle. It's a 25-year cash flow cycle. And people go, 25 years? Yeah, that's 4 times every century, right? That's the cash flow cycle, 4 times a century. And it just so happens it pretty well matches up to generations. Not
Yeah.
quite. Generations are 22, I think, right now, but still roughly generational. Up and until very recently, really up and until we really developed this product. We've had a lot of copycats over the last 25 years, but we developed a product. We said, look, a plantation of any kind of timber, we picked teak, right? But it could be mahogany, it could be oak, walnut. There's lots of trees out there, right? The species. We picked teak because it grows well in Panama. You mentioned Thailand, Burma, Myanmar, and India, right? And so this is traditionally where it's been grown because of the climate, right? The geography. Panama has the same geography, and it has one crucial aspect that's so important, and that's a dry season. It's got the right latitude, it's got the right temperature, it's got the right rainfall, but it has this dry season that makes teak really hard, and that's what makes valuable teak valuable. Teak is, some teak's not worth very much, some teak's worth a lot, and it's the hardness quality, and the dry season in Panama gives it that. But this idea of like every 25 years you can harvest and replant, this generational wealth stewardship. The problem is that up and until we did this, you had to have tens of millions of dollars to go buy a big plantation or buy a piece of property and plant it, because you have to have economy of scale in timber. You can't do an acre. You might, if you have a farm, you can plant an acre of walnut trees or something, right? But like generally, if you're going to do timber as an investment class, you need hundreds of acres to get any kind of economy of scale for your management and maintenance. So we bought a 100-acre farm. We chopped it up into small pieces, and we offered it to the marketplace for folks to say, hey, I want to buy a 1/4 acre. It's been phenomenally successful. We're about to harvest our first plantation literally right now. This month, the harvest begins. Wow. The trees are 27 years old. We're harvesting them. We built a sawmill, right? So we're going to turn that into lumber and sell the lumber. And so there's a lot of stuff there. But this 25-year cash flow cycle is a big one for people who want to steward wealth into the future for long term, right? It's an interesting one. It's a different one, and I'm done on it. I don't want to bog down on it, but I put it out there because it's so unique and it is so differentiated. Basically, here's the statistic I love. Teak is being cut down 8 to 10 times faster than anyone is replanting it worldwide. 8 to 10 times faster being cut than being replanted. If we just look at the basic rules of economics, right? Supply and demand. Yeah. Supply is dwindling, demand is not keeping up, or vice versa. Sorry, demand's whatever it is, but the supply is not keeping up. And so this one investment class is truly, I think I actually can make a prediction that in the next 3 years, our timber business will be by far our biggest business. It will eclipse our banking business and our development business.
In the US, it's like your business, or
our Panama teak business will eclipse our banking business based in Belize and our development company based regionally.
I think ECI's business.
ECI's business. I think our timber business, because each of those is separate. The bank's its own thing, the development company and the timber. I'm just like, you talk about time machine, you talk about seeing the future. Yeah, this one is parabolic in its growth model.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess that a couple questions on that one. I know we pivoted from these different product types and these quote unquote communities that are getting built to timber, but let's stay on this one for a minute, because I think it's interesting because you're buying these 100-acre things, you're basically subdividing them, right? Yep. And are you selling off smaller acreage of them? And is there an investor play there as well?
There is. We took the 100 acres, the first 100 acres. We're now on our 5th farm that we're doing. So it's been incredibly successful. We've taken them and we've chopped them up into 1/4 acre lots. And you own it. You own the land. You own the trees. They're yours. But the thing that we did different, and this is what really excites our investors, is you don't get the value of the logs, right? Most timber investments, you send the logging company in, they cut them down. They tell you, oh, we'll pay you so much per log. It's cubic meter, but whatever. We'll pay you so much per cubic meter per log, right? But it's raw log, right? And these logs are then taken, put in containers and shipped off to India, where they turn them into lumber and furniture. And then an Indian company makes all the upside, all the vertical. Sure. What we did was we just said, that's silly. Why don't we build a sawmill? Why don't we take the logs? Why don't we turn them into lumber? Why don't we take some of the lumber and sell it? Why don't we take some of the lumber and turn it into finished products? And oh, by the way, you, Mr. or Mrs. Investor of a quarter acre, you get the value of the finished product, whether it's lumber or tables or chairs or whatever it is, right? And how we make money, because I love alignment. I actually, just generally in investment, alignment to me is the fundamental bottom line. I want to know that if I'm the investor, that you make money when I make money. That's what I want. Like, you make money, I make money. And so we aligned our investment. When the Teak, we said, look, we're going to take as a management fee 20% of whatever we earn for you. That's our fee. Cool. And so my goal is to make you as much money as possible, because I want my 20% of the biggest number, right? And so the more we can take that log and turn it into lumber, which is a great vertical, right? Now you're capturing like 4, 5, 6x. Then you can take the lumber and turn it into chairs and tables and cutting boards and whatever it is, right? Now you're talking about another leveraging up of many X, right? And so what we really did is we stacked it up so that we get 20% of this bigger number, but the investor gets 80% of a much bigger number. And so, yes, that was the business model from 25, 27 years ago now. And it took us 2 years to get our sawmill up and running, and it's running and it's working. And this year is the big harvest, the first harvest, which is, very exciting.
That's exciting.
It is.
So you should be excited. It's really cool thesis too, especially if you've done the whole total market analysis as well from all the teak in all these different countries. But so one more question before we chunk up here for a second, which does that look like? So for every dollar that's earned from whatever the product revenue is, then the quote unquote waterfall, or you guys get the 2 cents and the investor gets 8 cents.
Yep. That's right. The costs come off the top, and then whatever the hard costs of the actual transportation and cutting it and all that kind of stuff. And then we get 20, they get 80. Yep. Okay,
cool. So whatever the operating costs are, and then straight at the same time, not a full like return of capital for you guys first or anything like that.
No, it's straight 80-20. And the really cool thing is that people look, I'm going to use the word average. The average investor looks at this and says, 25 years, 25 years. The really savvy investor looks at this and goes, you know what? I have enough toys. I have this car, that car. I got big TVs. I got other stuff, right? I want to invest my money. Maybe got some kids, right? And I think this is really where it gets exciting, right? I've got some small kids, right? And you say, you know what? And this is what I did 27 years ago. I planted this 100 acres with a few buddies. And we just said, you know what? In 25 years, we're either going to need the money and we're going to be really glad we did this, or in 25 years, we're not going to need the money and we're going to be really glad we did this. We're really glad we did this. But the idea is that me and my buddies, we would all get the first harvest, right? And then our kids, 25 years now in the future, would get the next harvest. And the grandkids would get the next harvest after that, right? And so on. And this is what the uber wealthy have been doing for centuries, right? Like the timber industry has been locked up by the mega family offices, endowments, Harvard, Yale. These guys have big timber investments, right? Because they think 25-year cycles or whatever it is, right? The average investor doesn't. But I think that the small investor, right? Because we have 3 teak bundle, we have 3/4 of an acre for 22 grand. This is such a de minimis number, right? Our Marriott units start at 350, right? It's a whole different product, right? But for the small investor who understands the savviness of what these uber wealthy have been doing for centuries, and this is a chance to get in for less than 25 grand, like that works. And for the accredited investors who's saying that might work for me too, but I want something also a little sexier, Marriott property at 350 kind of gets them in the door for that. So that, again, that product differentiation across the investment spectrum really has served many people in ways that they didn't imagine possible, honestly. Like we've really brought something to the table that most people in the U.S. just didn't think was possible.
Or didn't even know to ask about. Or if they did, it was, that might be interesting. I'm sure someone's doing that. I have no idea who's doing that.
Or how to get involved, right?
Yeah. This is really fun. And thanks for providing that full spectrum of things to think about, and also dropping some of those price points on there too. For the Marriott units, these are, we mentioned that earlier, it's a whole development, right? Tell us a little bit more. So I want to hear a little more about what these quote unquote Marriott units look like square footage. I don't know. Where are they? You said it's like the Cancun and Belize.
Yeah.
I didn't know where that was. I'll have to look it up.
Look it up. San Pedro, Ambergris Key, and Key is spelled Caye, Ambergris Key. The town is San Pedro. Ambergris Key is this 26-mile long island, maybe 3-4 miles wide at the widest. And but what's interesting, the country, the Belize is a whole country. It's a small country, whatever. It's 180 miles by 75 miles wide. But this tiny little island generates 70% of all the tourism revenue of the entire country comes from this tiny little island, and really comes from the bottom third of it, right? So you can see how critically important thin slicing of location is, right? Location. And to use this time machine analogy, like when I first went there 34 years ago now, there were sand streets. There was no pavement on the entire island. The tallest building was 2 stories. Like it was a sleepy little fishing village. But Belize as a country is a financial services center, much like the Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, British Virgin Islands, right? But these countries have moved up this time machine development curve, right? And so what you saw in a place like the Caymans 30 years ago, like you might have been able to buy a Marriott oceanfront resort property, a condo, whatever, for $300,000-$400,000. But today it's $2 million, right? Because that's just what's happened in the Cayman Islands. And when you look at a country like Belize, you can say they've got a lot of the same things. It's a Caribbean country. It's part of the British Commonwealth, right? They speak English. They've got great financial services legislation. Let's just see what happened over the last 30 years in Turks, BVI, Caymans, Bahamas. Oh, yeah, this happened and this happened. And when we started to look at where Belize was about 10 years ago on this path of progress, we said, you know what? It's about time for branded hotel product, right? And so we jumped in. We started negotiating with Marriott. Some people negotiated with Hilton. Another family opened a Marriott. So over the last 5-6 years, I guess 6 years now, Hilton's come online and a Marriott Autograph's come online, and our Marriott's under construction. But this transition from sleepy little fishing village with sandy streets to really Belize's Cancun tourism hub, right? We watched that transition. And so right now, literally the last year or two and the next year or two more, these windows are 2, 3, 4-year windows, right? So right now doesn't mean today. I hate when people buy today. If you're looking at something in San Pedro, I'd say look at it this year, right? This year, right? And so this is the window and this branded product. And then the prices will continue, and then they start to plateau at some point because they just can't sustainably get this vertical kind of growth. But that's where we are in Belize for the last couple of years. I think it's another year or two to run, and then it'll plateau off. But here's the exciting thing, Stephen. The next place coming along behind it, right? I say behind it, but the next kind of place that's moving into this, what I call the sweet spot of the curve, is a country that people just can't even believe I would mention, El Salvador. Right?
Yeah, I've heard.
El Salvador had the most horrible reputation, the gangs and the violence, and it wasn't just a reputation, it was real. President Bukele came in, cleaned it up, and then they made Bitcoin legal tender it was the first country in the world that Bitcoin was legal tender. So for a lot of reasons, El Salvador has rapidly moved into the bottom edge of the sweet spot of this curve. And then sometimes people will ask me, you didn't, but I'm going to say it anyway. Mike, if you were looking way long-term, what would you do? I said this at a conference 2 years ago, and I got laughed at. I wish I would have had some mad money laying around. Hey, here's $2 million, here's $5 million, put it on black, baby, let it ride. Let's see what happens. If I'd had $2-3 million bucks that I could have just thrown on black in Vegas, right? I said this at a conference, people laughed at me. I said, I would go buy 5 miles of beachfront property in Venezuela. I said that 2 years ago. And you know what? I wish I would have had $2-4 million bucks just laying around to go ahead and bought that land in Venezuela. By the way, it's not too late.
Or something. Yeah.
No, it's not too late. Go do it now. It might be 3-4 instead of 2-3.
Right.
That's the kind of time machine. But you know what? It'll be 10, 15 years before Venezuela would even begin to look like a sweet spot in the market. These reputational things take time to wear off. But in the meantime, your 5 miles of beachfront property are going to go from being worth $3 million to $33 million.
Yeah, I hear you.
Like the developing world is a time machine. Yeah.
So you have a book and you have some resources. I
I
will
do.
we'll talk about that in a second. I
Right.
want to close the loop on the think part there, because while we're talking about really market development, right, and long-term thinking in general, which
Yeah.
is, I think, as it goes, I recall the number one skill for success is thinking about time horizon,
Yep.
right? This is the through line on this entire thing, and thinking about it from a global perspective. There's a lot to be said in thinking about, you're asking like, what is the quote unquote investable net worth that could be outside of the US? But there's also things like, if you were to invest and become a quote unquote global citizen, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And I think that is a whole other conversation, which
It
is so cool. And I'm glad you touched on so much of that. And for anyone listening, go check that out and definitely go look at Mike's resources, because there's a lot to be said about making, look at tangible markets, right? What you talked about and you gave some ideas on. But I
Stephen,
think
real quick, I think you brought up a really important point. I just want to hit it hard. Understanding your timelines and getting the alignment of your timeline to the right geography, the right country, or the right location within a country
yeah,
is critically important. So your prescience on that one is spot on. Yeah. Yep.
appreciate it. And then finally, the other thing is, since we're talking about some of these merit units and you're also talking about the teak and lumber, is another thing to consider here is, and I want to ask because I don't know the answer for this, for some of the products you have here, is what is the effort involved, right? There's time that we're talking about, but there's also effort, right? And so someone could be moving to one of these communities for their quote unquote lifestyle, that it's more retirement, but another could be more of the digital nomad type of place. But I'm wondering, is this teak investment, like, what is the amount? Is this just provide the capital and you guys quote unquote do all the work, manage it? Or, and similar to the other units, is it just go invest and you have wood, timber, and property, the development, as well as the banking, but there's no property management? So
Yeah,
so
well, no, very good statement. Generally, there's not a lot of what I would call property management as we think of it in the US. Let
okay.
me just hit the teak real quick.
Yes.
We bought this property, we planted 100 acres in teak. I'm really a humble guy because I recognize the fact that I don't know what I don't know. And when I don't know something, and I spent 2 days at the Library of Congress back in 1998, there was no Google, there was no nothing. So I went literally to the Library of Congress and sat there and got books out about teak and teak plantations and stuff like that, so that
Nice.
I could go to Panama. I've been to Panama a bunch of times looking at property, whatever. But so I could go to Panama and interview the forestry management companies that we had lined up to give us bids, right? I needed to have good questions. I didn't know enough. I knew nothing about management, but I wanted to be able to ask the right questions, which I think we did. We hired a company called Heo Forestal, and they have maintained our plantations now for 27 years. And they're a growing business, and which is great. And I think they're going to manage them for the next 27 years or whatever. But that's the key, right? You got to find great people, either internal, insourcing, or outsourcing. And we do some of both. But in this case, the economy of scale was such that outsourcing that management. So to answer your question, yeah, the capital comes in. We're always planting teak. So when planting teak is always like June, July, August at the beginning of the rainy season. So we usually try to keep ahead. We always plant more teak. Sometimes we sell more than we planted, and we tell people, look, your trees won't get planted till next June. But generally, we're selling what we've already planted the year before or this year, right? Anyway, but then Hale Forestal manages it, and that's it, right? It's just done. On property management, I think, let me use Belize as a good case example, right? Marriott is Marriott. They don't let anyone Airbnb it. You're either in the Marriott rental program or you're not renting your unit. Like you can actually live in it. It's yours. You have title to it. You own it, right? So you can live in it, or you can lock it and leave it empty, but you can't rent it yourself, right? Marriott, it's got to be Marriott 100%. On the other hand, some of the other properties we have a condo community called the Bayman Gardens. We have a over the water tiny home community, first phase sold out. It's so cool. Those you can be in our rental management program, or you can Airbnb it, or we actually let people do a hybrid, which is really good, because I think a lot of times people, they don't want to deal with the getting the maids and giving keys, but they want to promote it, right? They want to put it in
Yes.
Airbnb and keep it booked. And we love that because that's just, they get extra revenues for doing the booking, right? And we do the management side. So I think you're going to find all of these extremes, one end to the other in the region. The one thing that you said, which is true, is if you want to do it all on your own and we just think, I'll just get Molly maids to go in and clean it up after the people check out. There is no Molly maids.
Exactly.
You're right. So there are complicating factors to quote unquote doing it yourself. It's not that you can't. It's just, as you said, the effort becomes a lot higher to do some of those things. And that's the trade-off, right? You can weigh it and see if you want to do it or outsource it.
Absolutely. I know we're almost at time here. I have to ask one more thing that's probably in someone's head here is, Mike, this makes a bunch of sense. What are some of the risks involved of investing internationally in Latin America?
Yeah, great question. Look, it's a function of doing excellent due diligence. You can mitigate much of the risk. And even in the US, you can't mitigate all of the risk. You can never mitigate all, right? Overseas, you can mitigate much of the risk. The biggest challenge, and I talk about this in my book, is we have to move from this idea of seller beware, right, which is the US and Canada, right, all kinds of regulatory agencies and laws and Ralph Nader and, right, seller beware. You sell me a junky car, I'm suing you, I'm bringing it back, right? Overseas, it's buyer beware. And the problem for most consumers, which is why most people get tripped up, not most people, but the stories we hear about people getting tripped up, is the fact that they don't understand they're in a buyer beware environment. And so the due diligence that they have to do is more enhanced. It has to be more enhanced. The problem is coming out of a bubble of protection, we don't know the questions to ask. And so when we talk about my book, like I got 3 chapters and 30 questions. I like a good third of this book is 30 questions that we should ask when we do our due diligence overseas. And so I think that we as foreign investors can certainly mitigate much of the risk like we would in the US if we do the right kind of due diligence. So that's the key. Do the due diligence. If a deal seems too good to be true, it is, right? And common sense, it helps a lot. But the changing of how we think from seller beware to buyer beware, that's the transition. I would say that the vast majority of my book is how to help people shift their thinking so they can transact, right, in that foreign environment.
Cool. I think so. Thank you so much. Thank you for mentioning that in the book as well. There's so much there. Obviously, you've been doing there for going to different markets for the last 20 plus years. There's no way we can even begin to cover all this. I don't know. That'd be a 100-part course to say a bunch of stuff. But even if you did, there's nothing quite pulling the trigger to go and check it out.
Yeah, come visit.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've got stuff in there talking about going to check out investments and certain write-offs and all that kind of stuff too. But doing the due diligence and understanding localization, what happens in other places.
Yep.
What else do you want to mention resource-wise? Where can people talk to you? I'm going to be checking this stuff out more too. Incredibly interesting. I think of myself growing more global citizen too. So investing other countries is a no-brainer.
Good, Stephen. We'd love to have you come visit. Look, we make it really easy to get the resource. My book is for sale, how to buy your home overseas. But the most important part is this, and get it right the first time. Get it right the first time. This is on sale at Amazon, but we give it away. If somebody sends an email to podcast@ecidevelopment.com and says, Mike's book, we will send you the voucher. Amazon will send you the voucher. You can download it for free. I want everybody who's thinking about transacting overseas to have a copy of the resources and the way to change their thinking that's in this book. And it's gotten I think I have one less than 5-star review on Amazon. It works because it's not a sales book. This is a resource for people transacting overseas, because the worst thing that happens to me in my business, and I have colleagues that feel the same way, right? When somebody goes overseas and they get scammed, they tell 1,000 people about it.
Yep.
Oh, it's horrible. Don't ever do it. And I would say the professionals in my industry, which are the overseas developers, right? And we all understand that protecting the consumer is critically important, because we want people to have a great experience. So they tell 6 people about it. It's the exact opposite, right? 6,006. But anyway, so yeah, we want people to have the resource. Stephen, I want your folks, if they're thinking about a property overseas, shoot me a note, say Mike's book, we'll get them the voucher. They can grab it and then come visit. That really is the next thing. Boots on the ground. Come see what it is you want to look at. Yeah.
Yeah. Appreciate you. That way you can go time travel and enjoy all time zones too.
That's right.
Appreciate you, Mike. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Path to Passive. We love connecting with our listeners and those on the path to architecting their wealth and improving their lives. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see in future episodes. Get in touch with us through email or Instagram. See you next week for a new episode.